welcome to everyone who's joined. Welcome to everyone who's joining us tonight for OrthoFi's Industry Expert Webinar Series. Tonight, we are fortunate enough to feature Dr. Blair Feldman. Hey Blair, glad for you to join us. We're so excited, and we'll look forward to hearing from you very soon. For those of you who are joining one of our webinars for the first time, the format is that we bring in some of the industry's most trusted experts, and we just spend an hour learning from them. This year, for the webinar series, our primary focus has been to take content from Nexus, which is OrthoFi's annual business meeting, and then convert those to 1-hour learning sessions for our industry. So maybe you've joined us before, maybe not, but we've just taken the sessions that we did last year in February at Nexus and turned a lot of those into learning sessions. But tonight is a bit unique. Blair is one of our speakers for the upcoming Nexus in 2024. So we wanted to begin giving you a little bit of snippet of what's coming in 2024, February 2024 Nexus. So we have Blair joining us tonight, and then in December, we're having Tony Panici, who will be giving another, some other fabulous information. So we would love to have all of you join us at Nexus in February 2024. I'll be sharing a little more information and a code to help you receive a discount for that at the end of the meeting. So make sure you stay tuned. Throughout this webinar, you'll be able to submit your questions using the Q&A. Now, don't use the chat. Make sure you're using the Q&A. Our team is going to keep up with those questions, and we will cover them probably in about the last 8 to 10 minutes of this webinar with Dr. Feldman. So let's move on to the good stuff. Dr. Feldman is the president and co-founder of Retainer Club and also the Mouthguard Club. We'll be hearing some about, I'm sure, both of those solutions throughout the evening. He's an orthodontist who practiced in the Phoenix area for over 22 years. He's also an adjunct professor of orthodontics at AC Still, and he's been there for over 7 years. This is really cool. He was the team orthodontist for the Phoenix Suns and the Arizona Diamondbacks for 3 years. Love that little fact, Blair. That's so fun. Dr. Feldman and his wife, who is a cosmetic dentist, Dr. Colleen Murphy Feldman, they have 2 boys, love to be outside, sailing and mountain biking and skiing. We are super excited, Blair, to have you joining us tonight, and look forward to hearing about the retainer programs and kind of your journey to get there with your solution. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Marla. I appreciate it. Let me share my screen here.
Perfect. And I'm just going to jump off of screen and camera here. So
sounds good. Let me know if you can see that okay.
We can see it. It's great.
Great.
Thank you. Okay.
It is so cool to be here, and thank you everyone who's on this webinar tonight. OrthoFi has a special place for me for a bunch of reasons. The biggest, I would say, of which is and some people know this, Dr. Jamie Reynolds was what I guess you can call my little brother in my orthodontic residency at the University of Detroit, and obviously he's the co-founder of OrthoFi. And now affectionately, I refer to Jamie when I see him as my big brother, because obviously he's done, incredibly well with his practices and in business. And Marla, we talked about at the end, or I'll definitely leave some time for questions. And I'm also happy to share how OrthoFi really affected my practice and affected ultimately the sale of my practices as I moved on to my role as co-founder and president of Retainer Club and Mouthguard Club. So getting started here, just a quick bit about me. 2 companies, and it's really important that I always share this, that they are what we call B2B2C companies. So basically, we work through a network of partners for both Retainer Club and Mouthguard Club, which we call GUARD. And those partners are practices around the country and soon to be Canada and Australia that provide services for their patients, and they use our online services. Background, I'm from the Midwest. The more I talk, you might hear it come out a little bit. My wife always says that's how I got her, or how I roped her in as my business partner would say. My voice sometimes slips into this Midwest. It gets a little tight, gets a little high up here, and sometimes you start to hear the bears and some of that stuff. So I try not to. I've tried to make a non-regional dialect that is more easy on the ears. But 22 years of practicing orthodontics here in Phoenix, and I usually tell people when I'm speaking that I feel like I've sort of done everything in orthodontics. I've been an employee, an employer. I bought practice, sold practices. I taught orthodontics for 7 years at AT Still. I was a key opinion leader for American Orthodontics, one of my favorite teaching opportunities. And then the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Phoenix Suns. The Suns were not good when I was there. And the next group that came on after me, I said to them, "Oh, obviously, as soon as I left, they got good." And the doctor, who was somewhere from Eastern Europe, said in a very funny comment to me, typical of his sense of humor, he said, "No, they got good when they got there. As soon as we got there, they got good." So whatever it is, that was me. And this is what I work for every day. This is my family, and my mom, who's next to me, and my mother-in-law, who's on the other side, and my two sons. My older son is the shorter guy. Joan is the senior. Both of the guys in marching band. So if you have kids in marching band, you know how much work this is for the kids, but I would say also for the parents. My wife likes to joke, you only do high school twice. I didn't really know what that meant. I said, nobody really says that. And she said, yes, they do. You only do high school twice. You do it once yourself and once with your kids. So I get it. But yeah, Jonah and Finn love instruments and music. And so do we in the house. We don't play any instruments, but we love listening to it. And here's my other team. This is my team at Retainer Club. We're about 20-ish employees, some local here in Scottsdale, Arizona, where we're based out of. And then several remote employees, both around the country and around the world. Our customer service team is outsourced, and they're amazing. But Craig Weiss is my business partner. I always sort of point out initially that he's not an orthodontist, much like Jamie partnered with Dave Turnen. Craig is my Dave Turnen, comes from a business background. He was actually a patent attorney. And then he was the CEO of a consumer products company that he grew from 10 million to $1 billion valuation in 3 years. And the company he grew had ads on the Super Bowl and wrap buses in London and Times Square ads. So I always say, when I talk to orthodontists, which is most of my job nowadays, I always hear all these great inventions that orthodontists want to share with me. I'm an entrepreneur. I've invented this. This is what I want to invent. This is the program I want to invent. And I believe it. Orthodontists to me are amazing problem solvers. And what I think the difference of, and I think Jamie would probably agree, partnering with Dave, on OrthoFi, is that it took partnering with someone who was very different, had a very different skill set to bring this idea that started in my practice to really where it's at today. And we've got over 35,000 patients in the Retainer Club system. We're in hundreds of locations. We're in more than half the states in the United States. And, we're still certainly growing, but it's exciting to see where we're at and where we're going to. So, and then I forgot to say that was Jesse on there. Jesse was right. I didn't mean to cut Jesse off, but Jesse comes from the dental lab space. Family business that was ultimately bought by 3Shape. And then Jesse's kind of worked all over the world, and he's brought strategy and growth and international to our programs. So starting at the basic, we're talking about retainer plans, and this is where I've spent essentially the last 7 years of my life. And what we used to joke is sort of the least sexy part of orthodontics, retainers, retainer replacement, retainer plans. And, just asking yourself, how do your patients replace their retainers? And sometimes it's funny, people laugh. And when I have to ask this, if I'm at a convention or a meeting in office, there's usually a pause. And if there's a pause, I try and help out. And I basically say, so they call your office, right? And most of people go, yeah, of course, they call my office. What other options are there? And that's when I introduce our solution at Retainer Club, which is an all digital solution, basically ordering online. But what I want to really know is, how much do they know about their patient base? How much do they know about retainers in general? How do they value this base of patients that you work so hard as an orthodontist to nurture that relationship? Most orthodontic practices that I talk to are like 4.9 or 5 stars on Google and Yelp. And it's because it's an amazing experience. The only time we ever typically see bad reviews are usually when it's related to retainers, ironically. And it usually happens to the fact it's something like they call and they say, I lost my retainer, it's broken. And the office typically says, no problem, we can fix it. It's $500 and it takes 2 appointments. And they say something like this. So there's a few questions they have, basically like, why is it so expensive? Can't you make it for free? Like, I don't understand. Don't you have my models? Didn't I just give you $10,000? And all these other questions that we hear. And it just shows that, basically it's not that simple to basically create a simple retainer plan for your practice, for your patients, for your community. So about, what are we on now? 4 years ago, if my math is correct, I wrote this article for Ortho Town called Long-Term Retention, What's Your Plan? And I really went through everything that we were working with at that point in time. That was what we call at Retainer Club, our 1.0 system. We've recently moved to a 2.0 system, which is actually very different. So if you look up this article, you'll see some services and products that we actually don't even offer anymore. But it's still informative and still useful. And then about 2 years later, Dr. Bonamici, if I'm saying that name right, who actually works for Reynolds Orthodontics, wrote this article. We actually spoke about it a little bit. She had seen my older article and she wanted to update it and share what they were doing at Reynolds Orthodontics. So this is an old topic that recently has been getting, to use this term, a little bit sexier. It's getting a little more interesting. And I have some thoughts and ideas and reasons why that I'll share. But I guess the first question is, why would you have a plan in your office? Why would you have a retainer replacement plan? And I think the first answer is, you're getting happier patients who get to maintain their results. There's sort of this dirty secret in orthodontics that if you don't wear a retainer long-term, your teeth will move. How do we know that? It's because we're treating a lot of adults who've had previous orthodontic treatment, their teeth have moved. So if you have a plan, you're likely to get more patient referrals because you have happier patients, like I said before. You're anticipating the patient's needs and you're providing a service for them. You're increasing the lifetime value of the patient. We'll talk about this a little more in detail, but basically, there's this sort of misconception in my mind that orthodontics only lasts 2 years, then it's done. You have to go find another patient. And I'll show an example of basically how that's not true and how, as the orthodontist, you should be saying to your patients, I'm your orthodontist for as long as you live in this community, and you're going to need me multiple times. Things are going to happen. You're going to not wear your retainer. You're going to get some dental work done, and you're going to need to come back to me, and I'm here to service you and your family and your friends and your referrals. So increasing that lifetime value is a critical aspect of having a long-term retainer plan. You'll decrease friction appointments. And I think I've got the next slide. I'll talk about what these friction appointments seem like. And you can tell me if it's just me or if it actually happens in your practice too. And then, of course, what's probably most interesting, Marla sort of referred to it a little bit, and so did the video at the beginning of this webinar. But how do you grow your practice without even having to increase your fees? And I think a retainer plan is one of the great ways to do that. So what's wrong if you decide, I don't want to have a retainer plan, I just kind of want to replace them as needed, and I'll be the guy who answers the phone, or the office that answers the phone says, come to my office and replace your retainer. Well, you'll end up frequently with multiple retainer checks. So many patients come in and they want free touch-ups because they're coming in so many times, and they want to do that to avoid having an expensive retainer visit. There's this lost revenue from having a retainer plan. You could be losing patients to another service. When that patient calls your office and you tell them it's 2 visits in the office, they have to miss work or school, and it's $500, they're going to search for other options. Many of them will go online, and guess who's in their ear? It's the direct consumer with enormous marketing budgets that are telling patients, you don't even need your orthodontist. Come to us, we'll take care of you. You're missing out on those patient referrals. And then we talk about these court case appointments. So this is sort of what I was referring to. Tell me if you've ever had these, or let me know in the chat if you've ever had these type of appointments where your treatment coordinator comes to you and says, basically, Dr. Feldman, so-and-so is here, and, they say that you didn't do a good job in their case, and, it's not because of the retainers. They want you to retreat them for free. And of course, what do? I go run to my chart. I look at the finished results. They look great. I see that we gave them a retainer, and I see they missed their last 2 retainer appointments. So it becomes a court case. The problem with the court case is it's lose-lose for the practice. So even if you win and you sort of convince the patient, well, this happened because you didn't wear your retainers, and when you lost them, you never replaced them, it's a lose for the practice. And if you end up retreating for free, And because maybe you believe that you didn't finish it well, it's a loss for the practice too. So having a retainer program prevents these court case appointments because you're making it easy for the patients to replace their retainers. And then ultimately, if they decide not to wear them, that's okay, but they realize that it wasn't the fact of not replacing their retainers that caused their teeth to move. So this is a story I sometimes tell. I think it's kind of interesting. There's a gap, this little chasm, this valley that you see in this little line drawing here, between what doctors provide their patients, what they think they're providing their patients, and what patients believe they're receiving. And doctors believe they're providing their patients great results, a beautiful smile, meeting all the aspects of occlusion. And patients believe, and if you can fill in the blank, as you're hearing this, patients believe they're receiving straight teeth for life. And what we believe is that a long-term retainer plan is the bridge between those two thoughts, meaning that if you get retainers and you replace them regularly, you'll bridge those results that the doctor gave you and achieving straight teeth for life. And what's really interesting about this bridge is that there's multiple off-roads that represent profitable treatment options from that same patient. So whereas sometimes, you think, and this is back to that lifetime value concept, that, you get this patient, you get 2 years, and then you go have to find the next new patient. There are actually multiple opportunities to find revenue within your practice. It could be that the patient got dental work done, they need a scan. How about a scan fee? Our practices at Retainer Club typically charge $199 for a scan fee, coming into the office, getting a scan, taking up chair time, seeing the doctor. It's a reasonable fee for that service. There might be revisions. So one of the most powerful questions that we've seen, and we've in two different scenarios. One is when a patient comes to one of our practices from our doctor locator, or if a patient comes into the practice who's a previous patient, you ask one simple question. And the question is, are you looking to hold your teeth exactly where they are, or do you want to see changes? And what we typically hear patients say is the third option. They usually raise one finger, and my friend, Dr. Alan Curtis, has like a one finger rule in his practice. If they raise a finger and they start to point to teeth, it's a charged appointment. It's not a free appointment anymore. And I love that. And it's basically this idea. They're like, I want a retainer to move this teeth. And so that's the practice's opportunity to basically say, retainers hold teeth, but orthodontics moves teeth. Here's some great options for both. You choose. And I love that sort of conversation in the practice. And we look at this lifeline between the end of orthodontic treatment, or maybe you can call it phase 2 treatment, and basically forever, as long as that patient lives in your community, there's multiple opportunities to provide that service for the patient and their family. So what is a retainer plan? And I'll think about it simply. A retainer replacement program is something that's offered by the practice to service the long-term needs of the patient. So I was on a podcast recently, and Dean Steinman asked me a question which I didn't know the answer to. What % of patients wear retainers? And I thought it was an interesting question. I mean, I truly do believe, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer, but if you do, that's amazing. Please send me the research. But I do believe most patients start wearing retainers. The more interesting question for me is, why do they stop wearing retainers? And I think I know the answer to that one. They stop when they lose a retainer, something happens to the retainer, and the only thing they know how to do that they've been trained to do by the practice is call the practice. And when they call, the experience could be variable. But basically, they're going to hear some version of, oh, you got to come in and there's going to be a charge. And what many patients do, your best patients, of course, will do it. They'll do anything for you. But some patients will basically look for alternatives or do nothing. And of course, who are they blaming? They're not blaming themselves, which they should do. They're blaming you for not providing a service that makes it easy for them to replace their retainers. So here's what I see as kind of the current replacement options that are out there. Number one, of course, is just call our office, which when I meet practices, that's the one I hear most commonly. I've seen in-office plans, all kinds of variations in in-office plans using words like retainer insurance or retainer assurance and co-pays. We've seen versions of saving your models, like, let me give you your 3D models, which I think is so funny because in my house, my wife would either throw it away as soon as she got it or take it somewhere and hide it because she just doesn't like clutter in the house. So I don't know what it's like in your houses or your patients' houses, but that would never fly. I would never be able to save my models. There's expensive subscriptions plans from manufacturers. We'll talk a little bit about that. But it's becoming more popular that some of these labs and well-known aligner companies are offering subscription plans, not so much for the patients, but for the doctors to basically provide for their patients. I've seen free retainer plans. I've talked to some amazing orthodontists that believe, it's an incredible marketing tool to offer free retainer plans, basically X number of retainers per year. I don't personally agree with that. I think there should be value associated with it. But it's an interesting marketing technique. And then, of course, there's the do nothing and hope answer. So to me, an anatomy of a good retainer replacement plan has kind of the following questions answered. What's the patient fee? And, this is sort of step one. What are we going to charge? And, is it based on a hunch? Is it based on something we've tried? Have we tested this, in our market? Are other practices charging something similar? And I'll show you some examples that I kind of copied off the web to show what people are typically charging for their plans. What do the patients receive? Are they getting a membership? Is it a gym membership type program? And I use that, purposely sort of negatively. The gym membership is you sort of get this revenue and hope that no one ever uses it. Or is it actually a service-based plan where the retainers are coming on some sort of cadence that the patient knows when they're supposed to change their retainers? How do they get their retainers? Do they have to come into the practice? Can they get them delivered to them in some sort of format? Do they have to call the practice? Can they text? Can they email? How does that work? Who makes the retainers? So this could be in-house. I hear a lot, when I'm talking to practices, the first thing they'll say is, well, I just bought a 3D printer. And I kind of chuckle. I'm like, that's amazing. Like, to me, that's just a better version of stone models. It doesn't make a plan, but it makes the ability to service the plan. And I always tell the story. We were an early tech adopter. In fact, early tech was sort of how I got involved and I sort of created Retainer Club. We were doing 3D printing and early scanning, and I mean early scanning. We were using the SureSmile scanner with powder. So if you've used those and you know what that was like, it was a torturous process, but that's how much I hated impressions, that I believed it was better for the patient to spend half hour in the chair getting this powder-based 3D scan than it was to shove impression in their mouth. And so it occurred to me after couple of months of doing these 3D printed retainers from a 3D scan that most of them fit. And we didn't see that all the time with alginate. And I was talking to somebody recently who said, well, most of my alginate fits. And I think you do have to look at it pretty critically to see, what percentage doesn't fit and how much time that's taking. But who makes the retainers important? Is it your local lab? Is it you with your 3D printer? Is it an outsourced lab or a major manufacturer? And then who manages the program and how are you managing the program? So diving into that a little bit deeper, when you look at the plan considerations, these are the typical areas that I think need to be thought about, especially if you're a larger office. So I think the JCO calls an average office in the US about 250 to 300 starts per year, which really to me means 250 to 300 removals per year. So if you're doing that and you're thinking about this, you're thinking about all of these topics. You're thinking about how am I going to manage the plan? The office duties, what's involved, what does the patient have to do? Is there office visits involved or not? How are we marketing this plan? How are we training our team to market it? Are we training our back office, our front office, our treatment coordinator? Is it on our website? Fees for these plans, performance data, which I think is the most important. A lot of times when I talk to practices, and this is a nod to OrthoFi too, I think anybody that uses OrthoFi really inherently knows what they're getting, what production is, because you just go on OrthoFi and it's so clear, what kind of production you're doing, what kind of conversion rate you're doing, performance data on your retainer plans, and then what kind of liabilities do you have? I'll show you a few examples I caught from the internet, which are interesting in terms of, if I was a patient, I saw this and it was out there and on the internet, some of these things that have been out there are really interesting. They talk about 10-year plans and 5-year plans. That represents to me a tremendous liability. Here's kind of what we think about when we think about plan management and what we hear from practices. So, is the management done in your practice management system? A patient calls up and says, I purchased a plan from you. Where do you go to look? Are you going in your practice management system? Have you created an Excel sheet? I heard one office that keeps it on a notepad, which I think, sounds daunting and terrifying to me in terms of angry patients. But in terms of the office duties, who takes the calls? How do they take the calls? How are they trained to take the calls? Can they text? Can they email? Those office visits? How does the scheduling go? What if they don't show up for that? Are we taking a fee in advance? Do we have some sort of copay? Typically, I don't love the words insurance or copay for any of these programs. I think they represent sort of like a low bar of service in the consumer mind. And I think about our patients as consumers. But how do you schedule those payments? What are you asking for the patient? Then the lab needs, who's managing the ordering, lab notes, like that earlier slide I showed with all the sort of the questions. It's amazing to me how many different types of requests we get for just a simple, clear Essex style retainer. We like it cut like this. We want it cut like this. I mean, when offices ask me, can I see your retainer? I think it's interesting. And the reason I think it's interesting is, to me, a retainer is essentially a commodity. When I talk about retainer, I mean a clear Essex style retainer, which is the only type of retainer we make at Retainer Club. A Holly is a work of art. Positioners, same thing, especially when they're made. They're a work of art. You can tell when you get a new lab person, or your local lab that you do get somebody new in the lab, you can tell the retainers just don't fit as well. They're a work of art. But a clear Essex style retainer is really a commodity in the sense that anybody or any lab with the 3D printer, with the right data and software, can make a really good fitting retainer of good quality material. So that being said, then what differentiates it? I would say service differentiates between one set of retainers and another. So how does the patient use their plan that they purchased from your office? Do they have to call, email? Do they get any kind of reminders system? It's time to replace your retainer. When it comes to marketing, how do we educate the patients that it's important to be part of this plan? How do we train team members to sell or offer or promote this plan? Fees themselves, how are we managing the financials? Are we spreading the payments out? Are we taking them all at once? Based on the size of the fee, that might be a differentiator in your practice area. Performance data, I think, is really important. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. OrthoFi is a tremendous data aggregator and collector. And at Retainer Club, we're doing the same thing. We believe we're going to be the largest collector of post-orthodontic care data and retainer replacement data in the world. But utilization rates, what percent of your patients are utilizing it? When I hear sometimes office say they have plans, the first question I always ask is, what percent of your patients are using this plan? And oftentimes they hear, I don't know, or sometimes they hear, I think it's pretty good. I think it's like 60, 70, 80. Well, that's a big range. Do you have a way of calculating that? Does your practice management system do that? Does your provider do that? What kind of revenue are you making from this retainer replacement plan? Is it substantial? Is it profitable? What kind of margins do you have on this? And then, of course, we talked about liabilities. What kind of long-term costs or promises? What's out there being advertised about your programs? And, what have you sort of said to your patients that you'll do in these plans? I can't tell you how many practices come to me and say, can you help me get out of this plan that I've created, that I promised to my patients, that I've sold to my patients, and now I have 4 or 5 more years of 2 sets of retainers a year. Can you help me with this? So, the plans themselves, I would say there's probably 3 categories too. There's totally in office. Basically, you come into the office, even if you have a plan, you pick up your retainers, you call the office. There's fully online versions, and Retainer Club, I would say, is fully online. And then there's hybrid, coming into the office sometimes and some portion online. So let's talk about who is talking about retainer programs besides just today and us and your practice. And to me, it's just about everyone nowadays is talking about retainer programs. So Align has their doctor subscription program. Smile Doctors has their retainer assurance plan. Aspen Dental has a program. Orthodontic Partners has the retainer guarantee. And many of you have kind of voyaged into this field. So let's take a look at a few examples. These are just kind of screenshotted off the internet. So this one is interesting. It talks about, we provide patients with 6 one-arch retainer replacement retainers over a 3-year period by following the completion of comprehensive treatment. Interesting, clear. It's on their website. It does sound a little complicated, and it makes me wonder, after doing this for 7 years, who's managing this? How are they kind of ticking off every time somebody gets 1 arch? If they get an upper and a lower, that's 2. So what they have left, and how do they use it, and how do they sort of take advantage of this retainer plan? This one's a cool one. Again, looking at pricing, what are practices charging? I believe Dr. Barry is in Manhattan. She's, at least on this, according to this, and I found some that actually are old, so I would think this is current. These are just screenshots off the internet in the last couple of weeks. But a $950 plan, Smile Pops Invisalign retainers for life program requires a $950 one-time enrollment fee. So we know what the fee is. This fee includes 1 set of retainers. In her office, it's a $480 value. And enrollment into our program for up to 5 years. The copayment for each retainer is $50 per arch, so $100 per set. Interesting. This was done, it looks like, on a Square site, which is an e-commerce platform. Pretty cool. Another one, this is on Shopify. which is another sort of what we call out of the box e-commerce platform. So Smileyville is charging $615. They let you break it up into 4 interest-free installments. I think that's cool. And then your plan includes 4 sets of Vivera retainers, 4 upper and 4 lower. So yeah, so 8 arches, 3 years of replacement retainers due to loss, due to damage. And again, you can do it through here. Interesting. This is the Smile Doctor site. They don't publish on their website anymore what their plan is, but interesting, 1 year of complimentary retainer repairs. I don't know exactly what that includes. I mean, we know what typically happens to clear retainers. They crack, they break, they get ground down. I don't know if that includes loss or how that works, but I'm sure they have the answer. Retainer replacements. Ask your local or orthodontist or team member about our retainer assurance plan. My hunch, because we have relationships with people who are Smile Doctors providers, it is because the plan itself has been evolving and changing over the years. It's been in the range of about $550. It's covered about 5 years, and then it involves a copay. So kind of interesting. But again, Smile Doctors is talking about this. Here's one to me that's super complicated. As a patient, I would be terrified. This was screenshotted recently, but it came from 2020, and this came in just a basic search of retainer plans, and they call it retainer insurance. If we zoom in, past sort of all of this information about retainers, there's sort of this warning: you may lose or break your retainer several times over your lifetime, which I agree with. Although it sounds a little harsh, for only $880, and I'm not sure if that's true anymore. Again, this was 3 years ago. You can enroll in our 10-year retainer insurance program, in which you'll be charged a small copay, $30 per arch. So $60 for an upper and a lower. They're calling it a $260 value. And then this kind of like statement of sort of social proof. I would say probably 80 to 85% patients eventually, if not at the beginning, go into retainer insurance program just because it's such a cost saver. Okay, so this practice was doing this in 2020, and obviously earlier than that. They've created a membership fee, a length of time, 10 years, and then a copay for each arch, which seems pretty low, for a copay, meaning they're not making much revenue in that, especially if they're seeing them in the practice to deliver those. And then, of course, our old friends at Smile Direct Club are promoting, when you search for retainers, you get an ad like this: $125 retainers with aligners. And of course, these direct-to-consumer companies are trying to disintermediate you from your patients by telling them you don't need an orthodontist to get a set of retainers. Here's a company that's out there called Retainers Direct. I believe it was founded by an orthodontist. It has a little bit of a confusing message on my side. The top is the consumer messaging: clear custom retainers for 80% less than dentists. Get a new retainer shipped to your door in 2 weeks. So if a patient doesn't like what you're doing, they go online and type a set of retainers, they may be getting these from somewhere like this. But then they've recently introduced a doctor component. So even though they're saying 80% less than the dentist, then they're saying to doctors, to orthodontists and dentists, are you frustrated in your patient's beautiful smile? So they want to kind of help you take that over. So they have their doctor portal in here. This is Retainers for Life. Dr. Jackson's amazing and got a great program. But kind of looking at this and what they're sort of telling to the consumers how to replace their retainers: a $440 one-time fee. And then it says down here per arch. I don't know if you, as a patient, if you need both arches or not. But I mean, as a consumer, I would say, yeah, I want the cheaper option. And the orthodontist would probably tell me, well, you need both. I believe you get 1 set of retainers for that fee. And then every time you need a retainer, their sort of payment is $43 per arch. So what is that, 86? And then of course the pricing is subject to change because obviously, they're changing over time, and mailbox delivery. So kind of some of these hybrid online, all online, you're kind of seeing, kind of an array of these. This one's kind of interesting. This popped up from one of our partners who was visiting the UK and found something called Retainers for Life, which I asked Dr. Jackson. It's not related to her. It's another orthodontist in the UK, although I think it's related to the Retainers Direct. And they're also talking about retention monitoring sponsored by Dental Monitoring. So interesting. Similar branding, obviously, to Dr. Jackson's product, but this is happening out in the UK. So they're even talking about it in Europe, despite what the jokes are about European and English teeth in particular. You fill in the blanks for this. This one was interesting. Encore Guards has retainers. They let you pick upper and lower arch. Again, so you can kind of go online and find this. And then, of course, everybody's best friend here, talking about a $550 example for a doctor quote, and you get 4 sets of retainers, and they're saying the cost of retainers. And this is obviously Align and Vivera and the doctor subscription program. So one thing we like to help practices learn, and education on this is one of the most important things to us at Retainer Club. But this idea that the most important metric to a successful plan is how much you're paying per arch. And the doctor subscription program is a annual commitment with a monthly commitment, and then you get a certain number of arches for that program. And I think the messaging that I've received, and I realize I spelled important wrong, but the message that I received is that price per arch is the most important. And what I would say is that a profitable plan is really about having the highest utilization, so the highest number of patients. Some of the practices we work with and we speak with have over 90% of their patients are purchasing some sort of retainer replacement plan from the practice. And so that plan has high utilization, and it's the easiest to scale and service while controlling the total cost, not eliminating them, not the lowest price per arch, but controlling the cost. And then thinking about that in terms of total cost. So if you think back to my earlier slide, when we were looking at, the staff involvement, chair time, does it take phone time? Does it take staff training? What kind of packaging does it come in? Are we shipping it? Are we paying for shipping? What other pieces are involved? The days of sort of the orthodontist that used to tell me, retainers are basically free. And I'd say, how are they free? They say, well, plastic is cheap, and Susie makes it during lunch. And our joke was, we want to give Susie her lunch back. Let us service this for you at Retainer Club, and we can give Susie back her lunch. So kind of shifting into a little story, I was at an ortho meeting, and I heard a suggestion for a great book, and I wanted to purchase that book. So of course, what do? I went on Amazon, I ordered the book, and 2 days later, like poof, it appeared at my door. It's so simple. You're on your phone already, and you sort of switch your screen, and you look up the book, you see it on Amazon, you order it. It seems like a reasonable price. It's a reasonable deal, and it's delivered tomorrow. It's just like one thing done, one thing off the checklist. It always feels good, right? To check something off your checklist. And it just took like a minute to do that. And so when I think about that, and I think about how we would have solved that problem like 20 years ago in the days of Borders and Barnes and Noble fighting it out, I'd have to find the time, get in the car, drive over to the bookstore. If I couldn't find the book, I'd have to ask the person over there, do you have this book that I wanted? And then I'd get the book, and I'd walk up to the front. I'd probably stop and get a coffee, and which is great. I mean, that's what bookstores are great for still. I love going to bookstores, but I don't like the process when I need a book like that. And just the entire process seems crazy. And then I sort of take that thought and I think about a set of retainers, and we tell our patients that retainers are so important that you have to wear your retainers. A lot of us say nighttime for lifetime. So we're telling them it's going to take a long time. And many of us say you should replace their retainers. I always tell people when they ask, how often should I replace my retainers? I say, once a year. So imagine your child. I like to put myself in the consumer shoe. Imagine your child has had their braces off for maybe like a month, and they come to you at 9 p.m, and suddenly they can't find them. They think they left them at their friend's sleepover the night before. They don't really remember. They tried to have their friend look, but there's no luck. And it's 8 p.m. and tomorrow at work is slammed. You're like, I gotta like call the office because this is crazy. And I know the last time I called, they couldn't get me in for a couple of weeks. And I'm sitting there staring at my child, and I feel like, because I'm neurotic, I'm like looking at my kid, and the teeth are moving as I'm staring at them. I'm thinking about all those appointments I took my child to the orthodontist, and that money I spent, and I'm like watching it burn up in flames, because the only way I have from my practice to replace my retainers is to call and order them. And to me, that's really why an online scenario such as Retainer Club was created. We created that to make retainer replacement as easy as ordering a book online. And then I think, what type of experience after orthodontics is complete and you've got that 5-star, you made that smile, you took that picture next to your, banner wall, you've given them the gift bag, you've done everything you can, but what type of experience do you want those patients to have after treatment's complete? The longest phase of orthodontics, retention. What do you want that experience to be? Do you want that old bookstore example, or do you want that Amazon style for your patients, where assuming that you approve it, they order a set of retainers, and within a short period of time, they're delivered to their door? At Retainer Club, we've seen hundreds of offices and tens of thousands of patients give that experience to their patients, and it's really transformative. And so, at some point I'll share some more of their experiences. So this was the book actually that I was looking for. I really, really appreciated this book. In fact, I wrote a quick write-up on LinkedIn and I posted it. You can see it if you go to my site. But basically, this is Dr. Jamie Reynolds and Oliver, who I've also known for a long time back in the Ormco days, put this together, basically an interpretation of some of the amazing data that they've received from Ortho5. And there's a ton of points in there. But for me, in my position now at Retainer Club, this little research piece was the most interesting in terms of a quick takeaway. And what they were showing was this. They looked at high-end orthodontic practices, and then they looked at a direct-to-consumer company. I won't mention it. You can go read the book and find out which one it is. And they looked at the 4- and 5-star reviews. And so the first thing you're probably thinking of is, I bet the direct consumer had no 4- and 5-star reviews. And the reality was 92% of the reviews received were 4- and 5-star reviews. In the orthodontic practice, 98% were 4- and 5-star reviews. So it was higher, but still 92% is pretty good. And what they found was really interesting. When they sort of distilled those 4- and 5-star reviews down to just keywords, they found that they were nearly identical. So in both the practices and the direct-to-consumer, they were friendly, they were professional, they were helpful and comfortable and kind. And of course, as orthodontists, we look at that, we're like, no way did they think they're professional, but really consumers have a hard time sort of judging. And sometimes a good website and a nice packaging is what they're considering professional. I don't know. But what the direct-to-consumer added that the offices don't have was easy and quick. And what Oliver and Jamie sort of put together was that easy and quick equal convenience. And convenience is a premium to consumers, and they don't have the knowledge to really differentiate between excellent clinical skills from the direct consumer and the orthodontist who's treating them. So one of the benefits that we believe at Retainer Club we're bringing patients with this online model is easy and quick to at least retainer replacement. I think Ortho5 is on that front end, in terms of converting patients and giving them the online forms and everything they need easy and quick. And I think Retainer Club is on the other side of that. So just some interesting stats, about online services. Of course, consumer demand since COVID has never been higher. Coronavirus added $219 billion to e-commerce during the COVID years. And then this idea that practices that incorporate online services will thrive. So whether it's online billing and financing or forms, teledentistry, some form of remote monitoring, appointment scheduling, or online retainer replacement, these practices will thrive. And the number that we see that's interesting to us is that 9 million Americans will complete orthodontics this year. And we know a few things about those people. 100% of them will need a retainer, and 100% will need to replace that retainer within some period of time. We recommend a year, but some people recommend longer. And some very significant percent, if you actually look at orthodontic partners on their retainer guarantee page, you'll see a video that says that 80% of them will lose or break them. I think that's the stat within the first year, and I would believe it. And so they're looking for ways to replace them. And if they're in your community, if they're your patient, they need an easy way to replace them. They want to replace them through you. If they're new to your community, maybe they moved or they're college students, they're going to be calling around orthodontists and asking if you replace that for them. And of course, like any sort of growth change, there's going to be winners or losers in this. I mean, we just have to look back at Blockbuster and see what Netflix did to them and their belief that they were just in the video rental business as opposed to the entertainment business. Warby Parker is an interesting example. It's a $1.5 billion company, and they require a prescription from an optometrist or an optometrist. Or an ophthalmologist. I'll get my names mixed up. They're providing glasses that are easier that they can do online. 1-800 contact is also different, is interesting. Similar, they require the prescription, but they're now trying to cut the doctor out. And I think what's interesting about that is there are other companies, I won't name names, that we have seen that have also kind of tried to bypass the orthodontist in typically providing services for them that, feels like it's skipping the doctor's office and creating a situation where there's tension between a provider for me and somebody who might provide for my patients. And I'd say at Retainer Club, we're always against that and making sure that the doctor is key into that process. So it's our belief that patients actually want a hybrid treatment. They want in-office treatment from a doctor. They really don't want direct consumer, but they do want those online service options that we spoke about. So I'll talk for a few minutes about Retainer Club. At Retainer Club, this is our consumer website. And we really talk about three things at Retainer Club. We talk about regular retainer replacement. So this idea of replacing them at least once a year to get the best performance from a retainer. And if you've ever had a patient that has come to you that said, I've been wearing my retainer for years and my teeth are moving, and maybe it's 3-4 years. I had this happen to me several times before we started Retainer Club. They came to me, I said, let me see those retainers. I tried them on, of course they fit great, and then I look at their teeth and there is shifting, and to me that says the performance of the material degrades over time. So regular retainer replacement, we talk about online ordering, and we talk about home delivery, and outside of that we really leave everything else up to our partner practices. And this is sort of the virtual triangle that we talk about at Retainer Club. We talk about the patient, the practice, and the retainers themselves. And Retainer Club is that technology background doing this for you. Of course, on our partner portal, there's really important metrics. I mean, to me, we created this in the spirit of the metrics that Orthofy shares with their doctors and creates and shares with their doctors and other doctors. And then this is sort of the simplicity. We wanted to make it easy. Imagine your patients, imagine your family members. If they need a retainer, they can go online, they can press that they need a retainer, and it can be approved by the practice, and they can get a retainer in a short amount of time, delivered either to the doctor or to their home. So this is what the patient sees when the doctor determines that a patient's appropriate for retainers. They get choices, so they can order as needed, which is just a set of retainers delivered with all the lab notes and everything they need from the 3D scan. Or the patient can purchase what we call a Smile Care plan. A Smile Care plan is a membership fee charged by the office, like you saw in some of those other examples. It includes 2 sets of retainers, and for us, this pricing is customized. So this is unique to your practice. Each practice has a different pricing model. And again, long term, we believe that we'll be sharing that with our orthodontic field. So what kind of revenue can you get from a plan? Of course, whether it's your plan or whether it's with Retainer Club. And one of our taglines is your plan, our platform, meaning if you have a plan already, we can take that plan and we can put it on our technology platform. And if you don't have a plan, we'll help you create a plan that's unique to you and put it on our platform. But if you look at that average practice, about 300 starts a year, and if you assume that 50% of them will buy a Smile Care plan at this price, which was $550, and maybe half to 3/4 of those people who don't buy a Smile Care plan still replace the retainer once a year, you're looking at about $130,000 of new revenue to your practice each year. And of course, if you're in that point where you're sort of thinking about selling your practice, you realize that this is bottom line, this is profit, and this ultimately that's charged a 6, 7, 8 time multiple of EBITDA to increase the valuation of your practice. So, technically worth $1 million in practice valuation. If we change the numbers a little bit, if you're doing 600 removals a year and you raise that Smile Care plan price to about $749, not changing the set of retainer prices, still at that 50% conversion rate, you could see closer to about $320,000 a year. So the numbers start to get really interesting. And then, of course, if you've got one of these amazing salespersons that, and there's lots of ways that we've seen practices increase that conversion rate of selling Smile Care plans, you're looking at, 600 starts a year, 749, same numbers, but you went from 320 to about 360,000 in annual revenue, and then of course practice savings. Coming to the end here, I know Marlo's kind of watching the time, but basically this is what our dashboard looks like for partner dashboard, and provides all those metrics practices need, so that when somebody says to you, how much are you selling in retainer plans, and what kind of retainer sales, if you're a Retainer Club partner, you have that information all the time. And of course, if you have multiple practice locations, you can compare them, because each practice is sort of looked at differently in our Retainer Club system. And then this is Sam Burrow. Sam's got an orthodontic family, a brother, a dad who's in the practice. I think they have 15 locations, and just, a tremendous partner. And they've seen the growth from this by making this mandatory for all their patients. They're automatic enrolling them, and patients can opt out of the program if they want to. So kind of the final few pieces here we talk about is, why would you outsource your plan and why not do it yourself? And so we look at these toothbrushes and we say, you don't make your toothbrushes. You're not sort of whittling them out of wood. You go and buy toothbrushes because they can do it at a better price with higher quality and less time, and a higher volume, and give your patients a better experience. And we think about outsourcing a retainer plan to Retainer Club in the same sort of way. So back to the beginning, we talked about, why would you have a Retainer Club plan? Happier patients, maintaining those results, more patient referrals, anticipating those needs of the patients, that they want to replace their retainers, that they want to be able to do it online, and they want to maintain their results. decreasing those friction appointments and growing your practice by adding a retainer membership program and retainer club sales, or retainer sales, I should say, without having to increase the fees, which is so competitive at this point in time. So I'll stop here. There's my information, my email address, and I love hearing doctors and practices reach out and ask questions. That's why I'm here. And I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Blair. That was a very informative session. Lots of great little pearls that I heard throughout the session. So I know that our audience is very interested to learn about this. One thing I want to mention, and I mentioned pretty early in this at the beginning of this webinar, that we will have you at our Nexus meeting. And my background, I'm with OrthoFi now, but I was with Ortho Bank for 20 years, and then joined OrthoFi when they purchased Ortho Bank. And one of the things that I learned is that there are practices that are 100% Ortho Bank is the solution for them, and there are practices that OrthoFi is the solution. And there really was a space for both of us. And we're going to have you with another retainer organization. So one of the questions that we've had is really kind of how do you compare your company and your product with other plans that are on the market. So we'd love just to hear a quick rundown of kind of the comparison points there.
Yeah, for sure. And Dr. Jackson is kind of my favorite. I mean, I think she's done an amazing job. I think, fundamentally, we both believe the same thing, that practices should have a retainer replacement program as part of their growth strategy, their practice strategy. I think we just have different ways of getting there. And exactly like you said, some are OrthoBank, some are OrthoFi. Some, really find their program makes sense to them. Our program tends to be, it's funny, we used to joke that, when you're talking about marketing your orthodontic practice, if your belief is that everyone with a credit card and teeth is your patient, your ideal patient, you're in trouble. You have to have sort of that flavor that's unique to you. And I think Dr. Jackson and Retainers for Life and Retainer Club are just inherently very different. I'm a tech junkie. You probably see that in the DNA of our system. It's a very technology-based system. If you hate technology and you hate sharing technology with your team, which I know many people do, you probably won't like our system. And we've even had practices that say our patients don't have emails. They don't use theirs, they barely use their cell phones. Some of them don't even have credit cards. It's probably not a plan that would work for you. So I think, obviously, like anything, it pays to shop around, see what feels good. And ultimately, it's our goal to service you the best we can. I know it's Dr. Jackson's too. And I think either of us would be happy to work with either your practices, any of your practices.
Right. Yeah, and I love that. And that's really what, our Nexus meeting is really about, just putting options in front of practices and letting them, just learn as much as they can about all the options in the market. We've got a panel for retainer options. We also have a panel for digital orthodontics or remote monitoring. So we'll have multiple companies on that panel, and just give practices a chance to just kind of explore their options. And I love hearing your comment about being a techie. When Ortho Bank was really very kind of low tech, honestly, and when we joined OrthoFi, I've learned a lot about being tech and data driven, and definitely see that there's a lot of room for both. So loved hearing all about your solution. So let's talk a little bit about team adoption. And I know that there may have been questions that came up throughout. Remember, these questions are coming in through various points of your webinar, so you may have covered it later, but let's talk a minute about practices who've tried retainer options and it's not accepted by the team, that not well received. So how do you really get teams on board with this kind of program?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, teams are generally smarter than sometimes we think or we give them credit for. I mean, they know what their patients want. I think in general, teams are really receptive. Every team I can't even think of one that hasn't been super receptive to the concept, as a whole, of long-term retainer replacement plans and sort of moving this out of the office. I think the teams that I think have resistance, there's funny ones that I meet sometimes. Sometimes they hear things like, well, I'm the lab guy, I'm going to lose my job. And my answer is, I hope not. I mean, that's not the goal. The goal is, that, long-term retainer replacement, maybe you outsource, but you should be making, what else do you make? Do you make, aligners with a 3D printer? Do you make Hollies? Do you make, any of these other appliances? We don't at Retainer Club do any kind of phase 1 appliances. So, the goal is not to take away anybody's position. In fact, it's sort of the opposite. It's to add a level of standardization to a service that ultimately sometimes starts off as very exciting and then gets sort of left behind. I can't tell you how many practices I talk to say, we started a program, it started off good, and then so-and-so left the office and she was the one who makes the retainers. And then somebody came in and they said, we owe them 4 sets of retainers. We couldn't find it where we wrote it down, but we know we collected the money from them because I can see it in the ledger. And it's just kind of chaos. It starts off with the right intention, but when it comes to execution, when it grows and gets more popular, which a lot of times these do, it gets difficult. So I think inherently teams really love this. I think, like you said, with the technology, there's different ways to add this information to the team. And then I think the other side is some team members will basically go, this is cool, I get why it's good for the practice, but what's in it for me? And so, I think it's important that becomes part of the conversation. I mean, we've heard everything from different doctors, in terms of what they do and how they bring this as a benefit to not only the doctor and the practice itself, or the doctors in the practice, but also to team members, so that, it's something that they talk about inside the practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think something that we see over and over again with any solution that we're presenting, either in webinars or as we're speaking with industry experts, it's really important that you make it a part of their workflow and that you put the systems in place to make this like, this is part of every workflow.
Right.
And that's another thing that we're really going to be working toward at Nexus. Kind of one of our theme subcategories is the office of the future. And if practices aren't adopting some of these solutions, and if team members aren't getting on board, the practice will be left behind. So, at Nexus, we have separate tracks for doctor and team, and we're going to be talking to the team about, how to present these things, how to transition the conversation, how to sell the value prop. And I think for any team members listening to this webinar, it's important that they're prepared for the way that our industry is moving, and that they know how to present that. So
yes, it reminds me in 2019, when I was sort of in the end of my practice, we would always ask patients if they didn't sign up that day, same day, like, I'm curious, what's keeping you from signing up for treatment today? And we started hearing in 2019, and I'm sure practices, are hearing it more often. Well, I'm sort of debating between you and just doing it online myself. And so we had to have a good answer. And the answer that we had, which I think is good, although there's always room for improvement, is, I'm curious, what's more important to you, having it done quickly and inexpensively, or having it done once so you never have to do it again? And I think sort of, having that conversation, we definitely won patients over. I said, because if it's quickly and inexpensively, we can do that too. And you can still get the safety and benefits of an orthodontic practice. But we just need to know sort of where you're at. And as we were hearing this, I sort of started to formulate in my head, in some ways, I think orthodontists and the complications that they put together actually created the environment where direct-to-consumer companies flourished, in the sense that they were saying that, they're inflexible, orthodontists are inflexible and complicated, in-office and expensive. And so between OrthoFi at the early end and Retainer Club as part of the digital solution, post-orthodontic care, I think we're creating ways for practices to benefit, get revenue, but still service the patients in the way they want to be serviced online.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a lot of what we'll be covering. So we're about out of time now. We do have a slide up on the screen here talking about our Nexus meeting. We would love to have everyone who's listening today to join us in very early February. You can use this this QR code to get a little discount off of your registration. But Dr. Feldman plus other fabulous industry experts will be at that meeting. And, you know, the kind of, we did have one other question that did come in about the cost of Retainer Club. We are out of time, so we're going to get some information of this.
Yeah, have them email me, and I can
particular
provide that for you too.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
and we'll cover that. So thank you to all who've joined us. Lots of great questions, lots of great information. We'll look forward to seeing hopefully all of you at Nexus, and Dr. Feldman, you at Nexus as well. Thank you for joining us again for one of our industry expert webinar series presentations, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.